We're rolling. I hit start. So everybody, welcome to the February Board of Ed Policy and Personnel Committee. Sorry, I just said recording in progress. Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. I'm Deborah Brooks, the committee chairperson. With me are committee members, Dr. Adam Block and Annette Melkonian. Dr. Shields, our district liaison, is here, as is Cindy from central office, and introducing Javier Arenas, who is, Javier, you're having an audio problem, so she's going to sign off, but Javier, you'll see a new face here. Dr. Shields just told us that she is joining central office and will eventually transition into taking over Cindy's spot for this committee. Am I correct in that, Dr. Shields? Okay, great.
Yes, correct.
I just wanted to check. So far, we don't have any other attendees, but we'll proceed anyway. And for the record, Dr. Hines is not able to be here today. And Emily Bays, who is usually here, our board president, and sometimes Julie Epstein, our VP, also are not going to be here today. Today is Miss Balabi Day all day, so I think that's where they are. Okay, so Dr. Shields, if you would proceed, thank you.
Of course. Good morning, everyone. So the first item on our agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. There is a reference tool for you if you find them helpful. I'll be providing some added updates during our meeting today that are mentioned in those minutes. The personnel update is our second item on the agenda. As the school board's aware, we have a lot going on in personnel right now. We've had a number of retirements, and we've also had a new position added. So let me go through what I think are some of the highlights of those positions. So the new position that was created in central office, it's called an administrator for curriculum, instruction, and assessment. That process is almost near completion. The school board will have a recommendation at Tuesday's board meeting on the 15th. So the finalists went through committee structure there. So you'll have a recommendation by Tuesday. As you know, Dr. Mioli is retiring at the end of this school year. So that process is also underway. We've been screening applicants here in central office as a cabinet, and we are going to be sending some finalists onto a committee structure shortly. We just wrapped that up yesterday, the screening process. On the middle school, we've had a little bit of a shift in personnel there. You may know that Ms. Lomangino was a leave replacement for Jessica Zuckerman. She has now transitioned into Dan Sacconi's position that was vacated because he left to become a principal in another district. We're very happy for him. So we're now in the process of filling that leave replacement that Ms. Lomangino vacated to take over Dan Sacconi's spot. So we should have a recommendation to you very shortly on that as well. High school, we had a guidance counselor that we mentioned in the past that has retired. So we're now filling that position. That position was just posted, and we'll be filling that position over the next month. Hopefully it'll be a shorter timeline than that, though. And I think that wraps up the highlights of what we're doing here in personnel. Any questions about any of those positions?
I have a question, unless anybody else has a question before me. How is the pool looking for the irreplaceable Dr. Mioli?
We had a very, very large pool. I think it's a strong applicant pool. You know, we're pleased with the applicants that we are seeing, though.
Okay, that's great to know. And same for the Weber spot?
Weber assistant principalship.
Yeah.
So we had a very competitive pool there that Ms. Lomangino eventually came to the top of and was recommended for Mr. Sacconi's position. The position, though, that I talked about earlier is a leave replacement for this final 5 months, which is a little trickier to hire because it's such a short period of time. But Ms. Javelin says that she is pleased with what she's seeing so far, and that her recommendation to me is she's comfortable with.
That's great. And I know in the past regarding guidance counselors, the pools have been a little smaller, and that's usually my understanding is because it's the field of available people who are guidance counselors, that pool in and of itself is smaller. Is it too early to know what that field looks like for the Schreiber guidance counselor spot?
It is too early to tell. That posting just went out yesterday.
Oh, so
But what I think is unique about the position is not only are we looking for a guidance counselor, but we're also hoping that we can find a bilingual counselor too, which makes the skill set even more, narrow in scope. But, in speaking with Ms. Director and Dr. Pernick, they really think, that's a skill that they'd really like to incorporate into the job if they can.
thank you. Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. I apologize for not condensing it into one. Does anybody, and how are we on clerical? Are we still chugging along?
We are making progress on that, yes, which is great having Javiera here, because she was one of those new hires, because Mary Moss, who was in this position before, moved to another position that was vacant at the elementary level, between two buildings. So you're seeing an example of the progress right here with us.
Awesome. And again, welcome, Javier. I think you had to jump off before, but officially welcome you on board. I gave a little introduction while you were trying to deal with technical difficulties. Okay. Any questions from members of the committee? No. Okay.
Nope.
Item number 1.3 on the agenda, please.
Yes, 1.3. You'd asked me to give just a little follow-up on the next two items. We'd had extensive conversation around grading at the last committee meeting. You were very helpful in providing us a summary of the comments that were made at that meeting. I've since met with Dr. Hines and reviewed those comments. We've started incorporating them into a new draft, and then we'll be sharing that with the administrative team to get their feedback. So I hope to bring more information back to you at the March meeting, but that is moving forward.
Great. I look forward to that. And just so the public knows, I had asked Dr. Shields, knowing there was only going to be a status update, but asked Dr. Shields to put grading and homework on the agenda with the notation that it would simply be a status update, because I want to keep those on the burners, even if they're on the back burner. And I wanted the public to be aware that things are moving along, and that we weren't going to have a full discussion today on grading or homework, but just to have it on the agenda as a status update. So next, you'll tell us what's happening with the homework policy, please.
Yeah, so the follow-up to the last committee meeting was that the NYSBA sample policy and the current policy needs to be merged and then brought back to a group of teachers and administrators to get feedback from them. So that has to take place. We expect that to take place, over a longer time period, because it's a bit more complex in the discussion that'll take place. But that's the chain of the process that we've established, and we've made the administration aware that that's the process that we're going to go through.
Will that merger come to the committee first before going out to the teachers and the administrators?
It can, if you would like that.
What does the committee think? To make sure, because I know, Dr. Block, you have specific concerns about the homework policy, Ms. Malconian, and you do as well. And before we send it on to the teachers and the administrators, do we want the board to weigh in on what the board would like to see included? Or do we want, I feel like it's a chicken egg thing, so I'm not quite sure, and I don't want to dictate it by myself. So I would like to get a sense of the committee.
I think it would be helpful for us to see where they start, so that we can kind of offer some kind of overall generalized thoughts on it before it goes further.
Dr. Block, your thoughts?
Sorry, I had to step away for a second. This is on homework policy?
Yes, this is the homework policy. So the process, we're trying to figure out the process. Right now, the NISPA template and our ancient policy are with central administration, being merged, married together, and we're trying to figure out the next step. Once that merger takes place, does the committee want to see it before it goes to the teachers and the administrators for their input? Or do we want to see what the teachers and the administrators do with that married piece?
Great
And bring
question.
it to us?
Yeah, I'm going to work backwards here, which is that, given how long this has all taken, I want this to go directly because I think that will be faster. I see no reason why we can't have a decision on this by the end of the school year. So it seems to me that we should give it to the teachers and give them a reasonable period of time to review it. I think that period of time should be like 4 to 6 weeks. And then it should come back to this committee after both have had their say in it. And in my perspective in it, which I said last time, but I'll say again, is that I want time limits or not time limits, estimated time approximations by grade level. And, even at the middle school and high school level, essentially by class. PGCD actually had that for the high school level, which I thought was great. And so I just want to see those sort of codified, I guess is the term. That's my objective for this. I'm not an expert in education, so I don't know those numbers, but I feel comfortable that if we have numbers, that will give some consistency across the district.
So if I understand you correctly, you do not want to see the merger of the NISPA template and our existing old policy before it goes to the teachers and the administrators. So right now, we took the NISPA. I just want to make sure I understand you. I'm not trying to.
Yes, correct. I feel comfortable with it going directly for expediency, just because I think the only way to get this done this year is to do it that way.
Ms. Malconian, back to you. Because we now have,
Well,
we're entitled to our opinions and our thoughts, right? So this is why we're here.
right,
We're not
right.
looking.
So what I had said, Adam, that you had missed was that I had suggested that we see it to start so that we could give some general impressions and thoughts headed into the work that the teachers and administrators would be doing. But now what do you think, Deb?
To give, my thought was aligned with yours, Nan, to have the board put in what, because it's a board policy, right? To have the board put in what our overarching thought is when we see the two pieces married, to give the board's overarching thought to the teachers for the teachers to then review. And I honestly, that's why I said it's chicken and egg. I'm just not sure process wise what the right thing to do is, because I know that the teacher component and the administrator component is important. Because my concern is that if it comes back to us and we change, well, I honestly, this is a tough one, because this is board policy, right? And so we have to design the policy, but we also need the input of the educators because the homework occurs in the classroom.
Ms. Brooks, I don't know if it helps you, but I'm referring back to the minutes from our last meeting.
Yes.
In the minutes from our last meeting, it seemed like the committee wanted it to go from central office directly to the teachers and administrators. I don't know if that helps. That was the sense of the committee. It seemed like last month, but we can adjust however you wish.
It helps. I know. There were community comments that came out of an Agate meeting. I don't know if those. Well, I guess let's send it to the teachers and the administrators, and we can always add to. And if it needs to go back and forth, but at least they will have that piece. I understand Dr. Block's concern about the timing. Do you have any sense, Dr. Shields, and I don't know if there's a right answer to the process. Do you have any sense as to how long the marriage template will be with PGCD? Is it appropriate for the board to say we want this back in a month or by the April meeting? Is that an appropriate thing to do?
So it's appropriate, and it typically comes from the superintendent, who sets a timeline on tasks that are given to PGCD. And PGCD's been very good about following those timelines in the past. So I think what Dr. Block said earlier is that the goal is to have this completed by the policy committee by the end of the school year. I think that's a reasonable timeline, and I think we have time between now and then to give PGCD a voice, which is very important in the process, and then give you time to provide feedback on what their voice has said. So and be able to get it onto an agenda, by June, I think is a reasonable timeline.
Okay, I know that I will do my part to make sure that happens. Dr. Block?
I want to complete it by the board by the end of the school year. And I'm going to be reasonable about this, believe it or not, which is that I think a first read by the board. If the board comes back with changes, etc., that is, that onus is on the board for, wanting to tweak it. But I think we should create a timeline that sets us up so that the board has an opportunity to read it and potentially vote on it by the final June meeting. That would be my objective. I haven't worked that timeline backwards yet with all of this. Sorry about the dog whining in the background, but that I think is reasonable, because I think once this new school year starts, once it goes, then people are like, oh, things have changed. I want us to ideally have this wrapped up if we can this year.
I just wanted to point out some of the highlights from the Agate meeting, which was a public meeting held last week. Not a board meeting, but the Agate meeting was a public meeting, so I attended. Dr. Block, one of the comments there was, and I think you were there, was that the homework, there's a difference between qualitative homework and quantitative. And that sometimes, and Dr. Shields, I'm saying this for your benefit as well, that it may take child A 30 minutes to do a 30-minute assignment or 30 minutes worth of homework. It may take child B 10 minutes, and it may take child C 2 hours. And so the concern with the time limits was that they could be viewed as quantitatively the same, but qualitatively different, if that makes sense. And if that's a thought that you could pass along to the teachers to keep that in mind. And I think the issue is no homework versus a boatload of homework. And for some children, homework is going to be more onerous than others. And so there was also the thought, and I'm not sure if we had mentioned this before, but that parents should be involved to the greatest extent possible in helping their children, especially the young ones, manage the homework, and and to create a partnership with the teachers, so that if what is generally reasonable for the general class becomes untenable or unreasonable for a particular child, that the parent should seek a partnership with the teacher to let the teacher know that the child is struggling with homework. And as a policy, as a just as part of the general whole child board philosophy of not having a child fret and struggle with what a teacher might think is reasonable, but what becomes onerous for a particular child. So I don't know if there's a way to incorporate that. And I know that teachers have been receptive in the past when they know a child is trying, but is simply truly struggling with homework, that there's certain expectations that maybe the child can't meet, and there should be a partnership with the parents. However you want to convey that in the policy, but I don't mean to be long-winded, but it was a really important point that was brought up, and I just wanted to do it justice.
Thank you. Yep, we understand.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other comments before we? So do you think we can see it back in April at the April meeting? The March meeting is the 16th, and I know we have a week of break-in, so I'm not expecting it back in March, although if it comes back in March, that's nice. We'll be ready for it. But do you think April would be reasonable?
I think April or May fits into your timeline of getting it on for a first reading in June. So I think if we work backwards from that first reading by the end of June, I think hitting April or May, is a good spot to target.
Okay, thank you. Any other?
Can I just add one final point? My comments were, I want tangible time limits. I want those time limits to be estimates, not caps. I want it to be not to include the standard reading. So for example, my kids are assigned to read 20 minutes a day. That should not be inclusive of the homework. And I think the reasoning was also brought up at the Agate by, I remember who it was, but I won't call them out. But they said, at the elementary level, it's really important for them to develop the study habits that they're going to need at the middle school level. And I don't necessarily see that happening consistently right now. And so I think that's important. And to get to Deb's point, I also agree that if it's going to take a kid 2 hours, to do homework that takes many of the other students 20 minutes to do, that the teacher can feel free to, should instruct the student, do not spend in excess of X amount of time. They shouldn't be penalized in their grade for that. I feel very comfortable with that, but I think that the remainder of the class needs to get an amount that teaches them strong study habits that they can build on in middle school.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's the overarching philosophy and of the district, I hope, is one of the partnership and the cooperation and the well-being of the child, whether it's setting the child up for success in middle school or whatever the purpose of the homework is. Okay, great. Dr. Shields, any questions, concerns? Okay, thank you.
Nope.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
So the next item on the agenda is item 1.5. And I can give a summation, a little brief summary. You can, it's up to you, Dr. Shields.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So item 1.5 is policy 2342, which is agenda preparation and dissemination. And our existing policy is, of course, old. And it's very, very short. And actually, it was revised in 2019, but it was basically kept the same as it was in 1991. But since it was revised, the open meetings law has been revised to reflect certain requirements within the agenda preparation and dissemination. And our current policies between this policy and our regular board meeting policy actually comply with the open meetings law, and our practice has been complying with the open meetings laws, but we haven't codified our entire practice into policy. And that practice is about posting documents and records and anything that the board is going to discuss. Because we now have board docs, it's become very easy for us to just have everything that we're going to be reviewing, all the paper and the documents and the presentations up on board docs. And so I just wanted to make sure that our policy, as brief as it is, really is given a look at, even though it was just reviewed in 2019. But since we have this NISPA template from October 21, I thought we should take a look at it and make sure that we are in compliance with the laws. So with that, I have my markup of the template. I think also some of this may require Dr. Hines' input because it does involve the superintendent. So I know he's not here today, but I thought that we could take a stab at this anyway and see how far we get. Let Dr. Hines look at it. Emily Bays is the board president who's been involved in the agenda setting process. I'm sure will want to take a look at it, although she may want to wait until first read. So just knowing those two important parties aren't here because they are the two most important parties in the agenda preparation. let's proceed with what the template is suggesting, and just with the understanding that it may have to come back next month for another review. Is everybody okay with that? Rather than put the whole thing off until March. Okay, any comments from the committee? Yes, Ms. Maloney?
I was looking at the sample policy, and I just thought that there was one key area that maybe we should consider adding. It's after the second new notice at the top, and then notice second, and then the items of business may be suggested is below that. That is not included as far as I understood in what we currently have, aside from any member may request the addition of items. I'm assuming that means any board member. But I thought that this important piece that any member of the public or district employee or parent or student can ask that items be added, and it's up to the discretion of the superintendent. So I thought that might be important to include.
I actually had that too. Dr. Block, so you Ms. Mulcunny, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that was basically my only thought. Thank you.
Dr. Block, I saw your hand raised.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, so so I agree with you. So I will, Cindy and Javier, if you're ready, and I can always summarize this again if there are too many notes, but in the first sentence where it says the person responsible, right? It's the superintendent, and I would just add, or his or her designee. Along with the board president or his or her designee. That's just in keeping with what we have in our current policy. And in our regular board meeting policy that was reviewed, I think in 2019 or 2020, we did not specify an order of business. It had been that way. There was a certain order, but the committee at the time and the board, when the board approved the policy, decided the order didn't have to be, things did not have to be in a specific order, as long as we had those particular items as part of the board meeting agenda, we could order them however we wanted, so that there was, it wasn't so rigid, and the board president was allowed discretion to change the order of the items if he or she saw fit. So in this first paragraph, in the sentence where it says, after the board president or his or her designee will prepare the agenda for each board meeting according to the order of business. So we don't have an order of business anymore. So we can say in accordance with existing policy, because the agenda is no longer going to be set. This comes first, this comes second, this comes third. So Dr. Shields, do you have any suggestions as to how to word that? Or just we'll prepare the agenda for each board meeting in accordance with policy number 2310?
Well, I think it's fair to say that your order of business on each board agenda is fairly consistent, isn't it?
It's consistent, but it's the actual order of the items. Let me see if I can pull it up quickly. I don't know if I have it here. Forgive me.
Because the language in the NISBA sample is according to the order of business. It doesn't tell you what the order of business must be. It just says to the order of business. But
Okay,
I don't think you're being prescribed a certain step by step in that language.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure that we're not violating our own policy if we put in there's a certain order and then we don't follow that order. But you're saying I'm interpreting order differently than you are. So you're just calling it order of business as opposed to number one, number two, number three, number four. Okay. Okay, then we can leave that in. We will include on the template the paragraph that begins, items of business may be suggested by any board member, etc. So then the paragraph after that, Ms. Melkonian, says persons suggesting items of business must submit the item to the superintendent. We need to have a procedure for anybody other than a board member who wants to suggest an item of business. So that paragraph says persons suggesting items of business must submit the item to the superintendent at least X number of days, so forth and so on. Do we want it submitted to the superintendent? Do we want it submitted to the board president? And this is where I think Ms. Bays and Dr. Hines might come in, that we would need their input as to who they feel would be the appropriate person. Maybe Dr. Shields, you could go back to Dr. Hines and ask for him to look at that paragraph.
I can.
Okay.
So can I jump in? As a board member, I mean, I think my direct contact is supposed to be with the board president, and I think it is the board president's obligation to submit it to the superintendent and have it streamed down that way.
Yes, but if it's a district employee, a parent, a student, or other member of the public, because the preceding paragraph.
Right, they shouldn't submit it to the board president. Yeah, that's fair.
Right, so I'm just not sure, as between the board president and the superintendent, which one of them wants that responsibility?
Well,
I think what Dr. Block's suggesting is that board trustees should be going through the board president, and the general public should be going to the superintendent of schools, I would think.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. So then we'll put that language in there. That's good. We'll separate that out. Okay. And then on the second page of the template.
Ms. Brooks, before you,
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
before you go on there,
Yes.
Nan, I know you wanted to say something. Do you want to address the issue of the number of days?
That's exactly what I was going to ask.
I believe the practice is the board president and the superintendent of schools sit down and review the agenda at least a week outside of the actual meeting itself. So I would think that anyone submitting new topics prior to that meeting would need to be at least 10 days. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that, though.
I think there's a difference between a board member, the time frame for a board member, because we get a packet, we are more aware of issues within the district, and the timing of our packet is 5 days before the meeting. I think usually what our practice has been if we have any concerns to be raised at the meeting, we need to raise it by Monday at a certain time. So perhaps we say 48 hours before. Well, the agenda has to be set. So should we say
I'm thinking the week before, perhaps.
for
like
board
this-
members?
No, not board members, for the public.
For the
or
public,
teachers.
yes. The public, I agree. We could say a week, but Dr. Shields suggested 10 days.
Oh, you're talking about board members.
10 for the public. You're suggesting 5 days for the public. Dr. Shields is suggesting 10 days for the public.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, you suggested a week for the public. I'm thinking 5 business days. So I think that we should go with administration for the information flowing to the superintendent. The recommendation from Dr. Shields is 10 days.
Yeah, I would suggest 10 days for the public. So when the board president and the superintendent sit down 1 week prior to the meeting, they have whatever topics might be presented to them.
And for the board, because we get our packet on Thursday and we're given time to digest what's in the packet, I would say 48 hours.
Yeah, I
Dr.
view I see the public agenda as being very fluid with the board trustees between that 7-day and the actual meeting. Because there's a lot of exchanging of information and understanding of what needs to be approved.
Yes, and things coming up at the last minute of which the board becomes aware. So we need, and if there's something that obviously needs to go on the agenda, if it's pressing, it should go there. So can we say, so that we don't drive the board president crazy with last minute requests needlessly, 48 hours? And if there's leeway for an emergency, obviously there will be an understanding.
I think the second sentence in that paragraph gives you that flexibility to make any last minute adjustments as well.
Okay, so we'll say board members, 48 hours, at least 48 hours prior to, and the public will be 10 days prior to. And the board members will direct their concerns to the board president, and the public, etc., the teachers, anybody else directs theirs to the superintendent. Okay. Are we good with that?
And did you want to,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Deborah.
No, it's
So
fine.
did you want to replace that paragraph with any specific, I know you were talking about changing the language of that whole paragraph.
Well, I think if you want, I can draft what we've just been chatting about. I think we wanted to break it down. We wanted to
Right.
separate the board member people from the public and staff member people.
Correct. I didn't know if you wanted specific language.
You can take a stab at it, or I can save you that trouble and work out whatever we've just been discussing. It's whatever's easier for you. You'll let me know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I never try to make it harder for anybody. I really do try to make it easier. I really try. Okay, any other questions about that paragraph? Okay, so then on the second page, it says the agenda will specify whether the item is an action item, a consent item, and so forth and so on. We do not specify whether something is a consent item. Our board docs is set up where it says action item, discussion item, or an information item. So does anybody have a problem with me taking out a consent item? Just those 3 words? No?
That's fine.
Okay. Because we'll specify it, to me, as mandatory language, and we're not currently doing this. Okay. Then after the italics, under availability of agenda and supporting materials, the paragraph reads, the agenda and any supporting materials will be distributed to board members. It's usually 5 days in advance. I don't know if 5 days is enough time. I think we usually get ours about, which usually, I guess, about sometimes 5 days, sometimes the agenda gets modified and it's the day of we get new stuff. So Dr. Shields, do you have any sense as to how that time frame should be handled? Because again, our board president has been very responsive and Dr. Heinz has been very responsive, and it's with limited exception that we're not getting things in a timely manner, but we're also trying to think about future boards.
I think you can change the language to say we'll attempt to distribute to board members. I think, and you were saying the general practice is 5 days, right? So instead of it saying we'll attempt to distribute.
Okay, great. And then the next sentence reads, the agenda and supporting material to be discussed, so forth and so on, will be posted on district's website and made available upon request to, it says here the district clerk, on our current policy, it says or will be made available in the administration building. But since this is all electronic now, well, not everybody maybe wants to go on the internet to find it. So we can say will be made available upon request to the district clerk or in the administration building. Dr. Shields, how would you suggest that be worded since you're in central administration?
I think the district clerk is very appropriate. If you didn't want to be so specific, you could make it, central office.
Okay. I think we should keep district clerk.
Okay. Because the reality is that the district clerk is not available at that moment. Someone else will get the information for them.
Somebody will, yes. Then the next part, I wasn't sure if this was mandatory language that begins, in addition, the agenda will be released to the news media, including local newspapers, radio stations, so forth and so on, in advance of the meeting. And then there's an optional sentence after that. Is it our practice? Is it, I guess the first question is it mandatory that the agenda be released to the news media, including the papers and the radio stations? I don't know if that's our current practice because I'm not in central office doing that.
I think the reality is that our agendas are public. And that means that anyone can get access to them because they're on our website. So there was a practice before public that you needed to make sure that they were available for clear distribution here in central office. But since they're on our website, I don't see that as a required sentence. But I see Dr. Block has his hand up.
Dr.
Yeah.
Block?
So I think you used the word, Dr. Shields, that I think we should just change the word to will be available for the news media. And so so if it's publicly available, it's clearly available for the news media. And I think that doesn't change much and also takes the administrative burden off the office.
I like that suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, I do too. But my question is, one requires an affirmative action, an affirmative responsibility, an affirmative obligation on the district where it says it will be released to the news media. And so that's why I don't know, are we legally required to release it to them if they ask for it? Of course we are. Do we have an affirmative obligation before every meeting to contact the news media to say, here's our agenda? This is my question. I don't know the answer. So if we could just check with Mr. Miller to make sure that there's no affirmative obligation on the school district every month or twice a month, whenever, to say to the newspaper, to say to the Port Times, here's the legal notice. Do you understand my question? Like, there are some things where we have an obligation to give legal notices to the papers. I don't know if this is one of them. So I just want to be sure before we change the language and say that the agenda will be available to the news media. I just want to make sure that we don't have an affirmative responsibility before each meeting to provide legal notice to the papers. Am I making sense?
I understand the question that you'd like me to ask Mr. Miller.
Thank you. Okay, great. And other than that, so in the cross references, there's a policy 2350, board meeting procedures. We don't have that policy. And that policy is pretty similar to our, it's kind of incorporated within our policies 2310 and 2300. So my thought was, instead of having 2350 board meeting procedures, we reference 2300 and 2310. Everybody okay with that? And 2310, which is regular board meetings, actually refers back to the agenda. And it speaks to the fact that the agenda must be posted at least 24 hours before the meeting, which is already in compliance with the open meetings law. The other thing I wanted to ask, and I forgot, somewhere where it talks about records being posted. Oh my goodness, where did it go? I know I asked for you to provide clarification. I just wanted to be sure exactly which records we need to post, and I don't know where it was. I had my question, I'm sorry. But I'm wondering, so for example, hypothetically, Ms. O'Hara has the first budget discussion, and she has a slide presentation that she gives, or a PowerPoint for the benefit of the public and the board. And the board gets a copy of the slide presentation so that we don't have to swivel around in our chairs. We have it right in front of us. Is that a document that would need to be posted to the agenda in advance? I'm not quite sure where that goes, but I know that was part of the agenda dissemination. The documents that we're going to review be made available to the public beforehand. So for example, the policies we're reviewing today should be made available beforehand. Our slide presentations, part of those documents. If you could ask Mr. Miller that, because sometimes they come right off the press. You know, sometimes we get them and they're still warm when we walk into the meeting on Tuesday evenings.
Okay, I understand.
Thank you. And I'll try to read through. I have so many scribbles and highlights on this. I would try to read through this and find out where that wording would go. But okay. Any other questions or comments about this policy? Okay. All right, Dr. Shields, the next item is 1.7.
Yes, item 1.7, student conduct on school buses. It's policy 5320. Board president had asked that we look at this or bring this policy to committee.
Okay, so the last time this policy was reviewed was in 1993. I reached out to NISBA, again, the New York State School Boards Association, for guidance on this policy. And it seems that most districts are incorporating this policy into their code of conduct, which creates a conundrum for us because the code of conduct is currently under review. And I don't know exactly when it will be revised. And the concern here was that the old language, the language in this policy is old. So for example, at the end of the second paragraph, it reads, parents are reminded that bus transportation for students is a privilege. And that's no longer accurate. Bus transportation is not a privilege. I believe it's by law or policy that we are obligated to transport students. So, and maybe that's something that Mr. Miller needs to look at just to make sure that Ms. Bays was correct in her assessment of this, because she actually said to me, please review this policy. It's not a privilege. They are entitled by law to ride the school bus if they live within X parameters of the school district or attend private school, excuse me. So I wanted to bring this back on behalf of Ms. Bays. And I think we shouldn't wait until the code of conduct is revised. I think we should revise this. And then when it's time to revise the code of conduct, we can always incorporate this into the code of conduct. And also to be sure that when there are incidences on the school bus, that our policy is up to date without waiting for the code of conduct. So that would be my preference. As the chair, I saw Ms. Melkonian nodding her head yes. Dr. Block, do you have any objection to that?
I don't. I have a question for Mr. Miller on this and a comment, I guess.
Okay, take it away.
So the comment is that I'm okay with reducing the language on it being a privilege. However, we want to retain the ability to suspend a student from the bus if they are behaving inappropriately, just like students have a right to go to school, but that doesn't take away the administration's ability to suspend them from school for a day for behavioral issues. And then the question for Mr. Miller, if we can transmit it, is what is the, currently we use the main entrance as the address when calculating busing. And I don't know if we have a legal obligation to do that or whether we have the ability to use alternative entrances to the school.
And how would that relate to the student conduct on the school buses?
Related to busing policy. So it's not related to school conduct, but it's a question that I want to ask Mr. Miller.
Okay. Ms. Malconi, do you have any comments on the policy?
I wanted to know or have a conversation about the third paragraph. The administrator in charge of transportation is directed to develop regulations for student conduct on school buses, including standards for behavior, procedures for informing and enforcing, and appropriate disciplinary measures. Who is that? Would that administrator be Ms. O'Hara?
No, I think it would be Robin Allen. Robin Allen, but I also had a question about this third paragraph. We do not have these regulations. I looked at, from what I could see, there were no regulations associated with this particular policy, at least not in our list of policies. And my thinking was that the behavior should be outlined in the code of conduct. I think that we could very simply say that students are expected to behave according to the code of conduct.
And do we have procedures for informing and enforcing and appropriate disciplinary measures? Do we have those things outlined anywhere for the public to have access to?
That's a very good question. It would, I imagine without having read through the code of conduct again, that there are procedures within the code of conduct, but Dr. Shields, would you know more particularly?
I will say, when I was principal at the elementary and at the middle school level, there were clearly defined behaviors that were not allowed on the bus, that were either in the district's code of conduct or in our building, codes of conduct, which is always in alignment with the district's code. So if a student, was going to, be given a warning or lose a day or two of bus privileges, it was because they'd done something that was in our code of conduct that wasn't allowable.
So in the second paragraph, it gives examples. It says excessive noise, pushing, shoving, and fighting will not be tolerated. So those are very clear indicators of what's not permitted on the school bus. But there are also things outlined in the code of conduct, whether bullying or harassment or destruction of property. So perhaps there is a way to put language. Well, there is a way to put language in there that speaks about, in addition to excessive noise, pushing, shoving, and fighting won't be tolerated. Students are expected to behave pursuant to the building code of conduct or the code of conduct. Dr. Shields, I'm sure you could come up with language that would marry your experience as a building principal and having to deal with building issues and school bus issues and put the appropriate language for the conduct on the school bus. Ms. Malconi, would that be okay with you?
Yep, that sounds great. I'm just not sure that that still gets to something publicly available in terms of procedures and enforcement. So that's the only piece that I'm not sure
Mhm.
we've addressed.
Dr. Shields, do you know where those procedures would go?
Well, again, I refer to the actual district's code of conduct, which gives the administration parameters and a list of potential consequences, and then the expectation that families are notified when there's a violation of a part of the code of conduct. So I think if you refer back to our district's code of conduct, you are covering that kind of language that Ms. Melkonian is bringing up.
Okay, so then we should not then still have the language the administrator in charge of transportation is directed to.
Correct. That will have to be revised. And so it will say student conduct on school buses, including standards and appropriate disciplinary measures, will be in accordance with the district's code of conduct. Or Dr. Shields, however you feel that in the building code, or however you feel that aspect of it covers the behavior. And then we'll cross-reference the code of conduct. I just saw in the chat, who will be in charge of discipline for private school students?
Discipline of private school students is taken care of by the private schools themselves.
So we provide the buses, and the discipline of private school students. Well, in terms of being able to ride the bus, so is the district in charge of, and I know Mr. Smith is referring to a specific example. He's sending a chat, and I understand that. There was an example. So my understanding is that the district, our school district, said you cannot ride the bus for X number of days because you did X, Y, Z. So is the code of conduct. So in that respect, I guess if there was any discipline to be done in terms of academic discipline or whatever other kind of discipline, that's handled in the private school. Not to say there should be academic discipline, but I'm just saying that aspect gets handled by the private school. But the ability to ride the school bus after engaging in this behavior seems to have resided within the school district in that example, in a real life example that just happened.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that real life example, so I can't speak to it.
Okay.
So there's a disconnect. In other words, how do we clarify how student conduct on school buses is handled in terms of private school students? Is that the domain of the home school district? Is that the domain of the school bus company?
We can check with Mr. Miller, but based on what had just happened, it was the school district. And we're talking only about whether the child can ride the bus, whether any of the disciplinary, or I don't know want to call it disciplinary, but any of the consequences are about whether the child can ride the bus. If there was any action on the part of the public school for the child doing whatever the child did, that's out of our hands, right? If there was any discipline such as, I don't know, you get detention or whatever the private school might decide, that's not in our hands. But I think in terms of being able to ride the bus or anything related to actually being on the bus will be governed by our code of conduct. Beyond that, I'd say we don't have any jurisdiction. vis-a-vis private schools. So I don't know if we need to bifurcate that and because let's say a child who attends a Port Washington school got into a fight on a school bus. So there's you can't ride the school bus for X number of days, and you get some type of discipline because there's a building principal who can handle that. For public school, obviously, you can't ride the bus for X number of days, and whatever other stuff happens within their school building at their private school is up to that private school. So I don't know if we need to go into that in this policy. So, and I
don't
see
believe you should. I don't
see-
believe you should be talking about private schools in your policy in this case.
Right. I think it's just about whether they can ride the bus. If they have been acting out on the bus or vandalizing the bus or whatever it happens to be. And I see you still thinking, Ms. Melkonian. So you're not there yet.
Nope, I was stuck on something else. Go ahead.
Okay, so are we okay then? We understand that there's a difference between discipline with respect, acting with respect to being able to stay on the school bus forever long, and any other consequences that may be handled within the respective school building, whether it's public or private. Okay. All right. In the fourth paragraph, I don't know I don't know what the procedure is. If there's a problem on the bus, does the bus driver communicate with the building principal? Or do they communicate with our transportation department? What is the process there? Dr. Shields, do you know? And if not, we'll
Yeah.
find out.
Yeah. It actually is both. What you're asking about. Sometimes there's a direct communication with the building principal or assistant principal, or another staff member that's there at the bus platform, for example. Sometimes the bus driver comes back here to central office and fills out a bus, report on an issue that may have happened, and then the director of transportation would share that with the building principal. So it can go on either way, as you described.
So can we add language to that effect? Maybe start the sentence by saying, take out the words on buses and start by saying, it is the responsibility of the school bus driver to maintain order on a school bus and to communicate, take the number 6 out of communicate, and to communicate closely with the building principal, comma, appropriate staff member, comma, or transportation or district transportation department. Because if it is a public school, if it's a private school, do we want the staff member at the private school to then have to come back to the district? To Ms. Melkonian's point. Dr. Shields, you can, since you understand the administrative end, if you wanted to massage that language, just so long as the bus driver is made aware of the appropriate people and the appropriate people are made aware that they are responsible to the bus drivers.
Yeah, I think we can change that language so it includes the building principal or their representative, and it also includes the director of transportation.
Okay, great. And I know the last sentence refers to the word privileges, but I think we're not using privilege. I think we're using privilege more of a grace, privilege in terms of a grace rather than whether it's a right or a privilege. Dr. Block, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I did. So I have a brief clarification question. The contract that we have with the bus company, is that the same contract, and is it always the same contract for the public schools and for the private school kids?
So contract in the sense that, so we have multiple vendors that provide our transportation, whether it's in district or out of district. The contract, I'm not sure if it speaks to student behavior on the bus. But I would have to ask Kathleen O'Hara, for insight into that.
I guess the piece that I'm going, the piece that I'm going to is I don't want behavior at private schools that may be condoned by those private schools to impact our ability to retain the contracts with the busing companies. Right, we're essentially paying the bill, so to me, it seems like this should be our purview. It should be the busing companies primarily, and they make a recommendation to us. It's unclear to me why the private schools would play a role in that.
The only piece I heard about private schools was about how student conduct would be disciplined by a private school versus a public school. I don't think it has to do with the contract that we have with the bus vendor.
Okay.
And it's our school district that can decide whether a private school student riding on the buses that we provide and the taxpayers pay for, whether their conduct falls within a disciplinary issue vis-a-vis continuing to ride the school bus. So in that respect, I believe the district has control over that. Simply about riding the school bus.
I think we could insert ourselves if needed.
Okay, so let's take a try at cleaning this up with all those concerns in mind, and we'll bring it back. And Dr. Shields or Cindy, if you need any help with any of the language, and just to reach out to me. Anything we've discussed in public here. Okay. Next on any other comments?
We skipped over the public participation.
Oh, we did. My goodness. Okay. So I actually there are two participants here. On the you're right, Dr. Shields, may I jump in for a moment on the public participation?
Yep.
Okay, so public participation is item 1.6. Cindy, thank you so much for pointing that out. It seems that public participation just doesn't want to be on the agenda today. I had sent the agenda to Dr. Shields and somehow inadvertently did not include in my approval of the agenda the NISPA template for the their latest recommendation from October 2021 for public participation at board meetings. Our policy was posted to board docs in a timely manner. And Julie Epstein, thank you, brought to my attention that the NISPA template had not made it onto board docs. So this morning I had asked, I let Dr. Shields and Cindy know about that. They were heroes at the last minute, posted the NISPA template to board docs so that the people who are watching, I see two participants, would not have had the 24 hours notice of the template, but they have it now if they want to look at it. So I am actually going to, because this involves public participation at board meetings, if the committee is ready to discuss the NISPA template, and Dr. Shields, if you're ready to discuss the NISPA template, I am actually going to ask, I'm going to break the fourth wall right now, and I'm going to ask the two participants if they have any problem with us discussing the public participation NISPA template, despite the fact that it wasn't posted within 24 hours. Does everybody understand my intent there? In other words, if the two people in attendance here who are following along object to having the discussion now because the NISBA template was not posted within 24 hours, then I will respect that and we will move this to the next committee meeting. Okay, so participants 1 and 2, if I'm asking if anybody, if either of you has an objection to us proceeding with this conversation, if you would please raise your hand, and I won't call out your name. You will remain anonymous to the public. I'm just giving them a chance. I do not see any hands going up. Okay, good. So we have the public's permission, because once this is recorded, hopefully whoever is viewing it will look at the board docs and they will see the NISBA template there. So I thank you, the 2 attendees, for allowing us to proceed. So with that, we will jump back to item number 1.6, which is public participation at board meetings. Okay, so now we have our, let me just close down this. Now we have our policy, which was actually revised in September of 2020. It had been initially looked at, approved in 1991. It was actually reviewed back in the spring of 2020. Then the pandemic hit, and then it went on for the adoption in September of 2020. But since then, and actually, if you read the notes in the policy update from October of 2021 NISBA, and also the blurb that came with it, there has been a lot of there's been a lot of consternation during public comments throughout New York State and the country, and so I think NISBA sought to create some semblance of order by extensively revising their policy. It's 4 printed pages with lots of notes and highlights, and also to make sure that school boards were in compliance with the open meetings laws with respect to public participation. And so, well, actually, one of the notes that is included here in the highlight is that there is no law that requires school boards to allow members of the public to speak. And then it goes on to say, however, it is very good board practice to invite the public to speak and to allow the public to speak. And Port Washington has followed that. So I just wanted to put that out there. And so now what I think we want to do is we want to look at our existing policy and the template and see what we want to do. Do we want to adopt this template with changes in full? Do we like our policy as it is? So that is why I have brought this here, and I'm just going back to the full attendee list. I still do not see any hands raised in objection, so I am going to proceed. So I am going to open this up for comments from the committee. Ms. Melkonian, you're unmuted. Does that mean you wanted to speak?
No, that as usual means I forgot to mute. I apologize. But I did, I guess the question, the appropriate question at this point is whether or not we, how we want to enumerate appropriate conduct during public participation and participation in the meeting at large, right? So what kind of language do we want to include? Is it about following the code of conduct in some way? Is it about following some other some language here? Abide by the rules for public conduct on school property. So I'm just wondering how we want to be more specific about what appropriate conduct in public meetings is.
Okay, so then may I suggest that because this is so dense, and again, this is not my draft, this is the School Boards Association for New York State. Because this is so dense, may I suggest that we go paragraph by paragraph? Because there is a place in this sample policy where they do discuss the public conduct or the expectation of how the public will comport themselves. I just wanted to note that the number for the sample policy is 1230. Our number is 2370. We talked about in the past how we wanted to align our numbers with NISPA's. And so if we look at the list of policies, so I'm just going to my computer to try to get that list. I'm guessing they changed. I don't know why they made it 1230. Maybe because it's part of the community involvement. But we had it within our meetings section. And our meeting section really relates more. I know this probably seems insignificant, but we're just trying to get the numbering right. The meeting section really deals more with what the school board does in the 2000s, in the 2000 sections in the meetings, and then the 1000s are more about the public. So I guess there's a philosophical question here. Do we want to follow the NISPA policy numbering and change it to 1230? And we'll also change the title to public comment at board meetings as opposed to public participation, because it's really a comment period. Or do we want to keep with our numbering? So let's just start with that administrative thing first. Dr. Block?
Yeah, let's migrate.
Did you say let's migrate?
Yeah, let's migrate
Okay.
to the NISP. Yeah, let's migrate to the NISPA numbers. I don't think we have to do this all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, it makes it a lot easier for anyone that's thinking about policy to really do a compare and contrast.
Okay, Ms. Malcona, do you have any objection to that? Okay, great. So the first piece of business is we change the number and we change the title. Okay. So now let's go to the first paragraph, which would be on the second page of the policy. And anybody who wants to read all the highlighted section is welcome to do it, but it's more of an introduction and also NISPA, I think, explaining why they have done what they've done with respect to this template.
Can I just chime in about
Sure.
the actual title? They changed it to comment, but I feel like some of this content in here is about participation more generally. It's not only describing behavior while making a public comment, but it's addressing behavior in the public meeting. So I'm wondering if participation is better.
Okay, I think the participation was about the act of commenting. That they're participating at the meeting by commenting, as opposed to attending a meeting.
Okay.
So would you, it could say public attendance / comment at board meetings if you wanted to change the title so that the public knows what to expect, whether they're attending, because not all attendees are commenting.
Right. Forgive me if I'm not remembering this accurately. Is there parts of this that describe just general good conduct during the meeting, or am I not remembering it?
Yes. On page 3, it starts with, it says, note the board may by policy, it's highlighted, limit the time. And then if you go 2 paragraphs underneath of that, the first sentence says, all speakers and observers.
Right.
Which I take as attendees, but.
Right. So that's what made me think that it's not just about the comment piece of the meeting. So
we can change the title. We can say public attendance / comment at board meetings.
that would work for me.
Dr. Block?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so we'll make that change to the title. And now we'll go go to the first paragraph. Are there, so it's interesting. We had started out at the board meetings not having a time limit to the public comment section of the agenda. We also, a former board decided that we weren't going to quote unquote codify the 3-minute rule within the policy, that we wanted to leave that flexible in case future boards said 2 minutes or 1 minute, and then they didn't have to go back and change the policy. Ms. Bays had suggested, as the president, that we start to limit the public comment time frame to 30 minutes because of the length of the school board meetings. And we were trying to make sure we could do our business and also balance time for public comment. That was never codified in our policy. She just took that on as the discretion is the person in charge of the school board meetings. With the support of the board on a trial basis. So the question here is, NISBA is suggesting that we include, that school boards across New York State include that the public comment portion not exceed 30 minutes, and that the periods may be extended by a majority vote of the board. So it gives the board the opportunity to allow for more public comment. So it's not a rigid 30 minutes. Do we as a committee want to recommend, excuse me, including this language in the policy? Or do we want to give the public notice that it's going to be limited to 30 minutes? The board has the discretion to extend it. There will be another public comment section. Do we want to set this in stone, so to speak? Or do we want to leave it as we have it, where it's fluid and it's at the discretion of the board president? With the support of the board. Do we want to think about it and come back to the paragraph next month? If you're not sure, do we want to get the superintendent's input or the board president's input before first read?
Yeah, I'd say let's at a minimum come back to it maybe later on in this conversation, even if we have time to just mull it over.
Okay. Dr. Block, are you okay with that?
I'm okay talking about it later, but I do think that this is the committee where we discuss this. I don't think we necessarily need input from anybody else to make a recommendation, and the board has to approve it. So we will, it's not like we're not going to have time to discuss again before it becomes policy. Okay.
Wow, I don't know how it got to be close to 11 o'clock, but it did. Okay. Let's Dr. Shields, is it okay with you if we try to plow through this policy and then we'll put the other two I was so worried we wouldn't have enough to do. We'll put the remaining policies on about the gifts from the public. We'll put them on for March, and then we'll take public comments here. Is it okay with you if we continue with this public participation policy now?
Yes, it's certainly okay with me. I just think there's a lot to discuss in this policy. So I just caution, I want you to have the due time it needs, because there's a lot to this policy that impacts the board president very much in how he or she would run the meeting.
Point well taken. And you are right. I think we will be here longer than 5 minutes talking about this policy. So let me open up, if the rest of the committee agrees, because this is too important to rush through. And I don't know how time flies. I feel as though I just hit the start button. I apologize. Let's open this up to community comments right now. Please help me with your last name. I don't want to mispronounce it. I want to say Susan Brossel, and if I have mispronounced it, please let me know. I'm going to allow you to speak, and you should be unmuted, and I will lower your hand. Is it Please tell me I said
Yes,
it correctly.
you pronounced it correctly, like
Oh, good.
windowsill, brass sills.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if mine's a question or a comment, but when we're talking about the bus and the transportation, I think in the parent community, when something happens on the bus, there's sometimes confusion as to what, as a parent, you are supposed to do. If you're supposed to be talking to the transportation office, if you're supposed to be talking to the bus driver, if you're supposed to be talking to the principal. I know Dr. Shields mentioned that if there's an incident on the bus, that the bus driver could come down to central office and put in paperwork of some sort saying there was an incident. Does this policy need to have anything that tells parents what they should do, or is it just all those things are fine to do?
That's a really good point. So what you're asking is, for example, if there's an issue, if your child is experiencing something on the school bus that should not be happening, or sees something that should not be happening, what is the avenue for the parent to seek assistance or help, or to report, or is that what you're asking?
Correct. There could be, I want my bus driver driving the bus and paying attention to what's going on the road. I know there's some districts that actually have like a bus attendant who's on there in addition to the bus driver. I imagine we don't have something like that for budgetary reasons, but I don't expect that the bus driver is going to be able to see everything that goes on or is said, if there's verbal bullying or just like pushing around, not necessarily, somebody hit you in the face and you fell in the middle of the bus. I just know parents who have had issues and there's confusion as to what you're supposed to do. Like, should I go down to central office and file a complaint like the bus driver does?
So Dr. Schultz, I know that there's a chain of command. I don't know what the chain of command is for the school bus. I think this parent raises a very valid point. So what magic language would you like to include in the policy? What do you recommend?
Well, from my experience here in the district has been that if a parent has a concern, they come to the school administration, whether that be their house assistant principal at the middle school level, their grade level assistant principal at the high school, or their principal at the elementary school. In the rare case that parents go directly to the director of transportation, that person always refers it to the principal of the school. So it eventually gets to the place that's important. I want to assure the parent that's asking the question. But the quickest way to get the problem resolved is to go to the school administration.
So can we include language to that effect in our policy? And it could be a student, it could be a student who wants to report behavior. So that can we say parents or students who have concern, I don't know the appropriate language, but who have concerns should report their concerns to the building principal or the assistant principal, or however you think that line should be. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I think it's a really good suggestion. It's looking at the policy from a slightly different perspective, which I think is really healthy. That we can put a sentence in there that says any concerns that a parent or a student might have about conduct on a school bus should be brought to the building administration.
Yes. Thank you for that point. That was, I love thinking outside the box, right? And sometimes we have blinders on and we don't see it. And then a community member comes in and helps us see outside the box. And I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Ms. Melkonian?
Once again, I'm off mute already. I know we're taking a look at our website. Is there transportation information readily available on the website for parents to refer to?
I can certainly check on that to see.
Might just help in some of those questions.
I'm just scrolling down. District under district, on the home page, if you scroll down to transportation, there is a transportation link there. And there's a phone number and an explanation what transportation does. I don't know if that's what you meant. But you're muted. You're muted. Ms. Melkonian, you're muted.
Sorry. So maybe we can add a little line in there, telling parents where to go for concerns if it's not there already.
Okay. I know I saw another hand up. Ms. Alvarez, I am going to allow you to speak. You should be unmuted any second. Any second, there you go. And I will lower your hand for you. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Hi, thank you. I just had two things. On the transportation, I'm actually confused on why a new policy is being kind of reviewed. In a quick search of my own on your own code of conduct, and I think Dr. Shields was referencing that, there is specifics on code of conduct and any behaviors, and specifically for transportation. And there's specifics in there as far as suspension from the bus and the procedures after that. Should the suspension from transportation amount to a suspension of attendance, the district should make appropriate arrangements to provide the student's education. Before that, it even says the student's parent will become responsible for seeing how did they get to school. But however, the parents will be provided with a reasonable opportunity for an informal conference with the building principal or the principal's designee to discuss the conduct and the penalty involved. The reason I bring it up prior to some of the questions is, as a student with special needs children, my only concern with some of changing language is the code of conduct also specifies the need to review all circumstances, including extenuating circumstances, not limited to medical conditions. So in kind of hearing, I don't know how this stemmed off from the review of needing to look at the transportation policy as for when it pertains to kind of misbehavior. But I mean, the code of conduct is kind of laid out in a way for any misbehavior at a bus, as far as verbal warning, written warnings, and it also, before any kind of like reprimand, it discusses like support groups, corrective instruction, intervention, evaluation. So that's where I just ask that the board kind of review the code of conduct when looking at anything being needed to change for bus. The reason I mention it myself, as far as my concerns for someone with a special needs child, is there are certain things that maybe a bus driver is not aware of, or the Robin Allen from transportation, not Robin, I forget her first name, but Robin from transportation is not aware of potentially, as far as it pertains from a child's mental background or the potential need to look at the overall picture. And put aside even children with special needs, right? There is a lot of different things that go on a bus that the prior community comment mentioned. We're asking that the bus driver actually keep the bus safe driving. So it is hard to kind of review everything. So I just hope that the code of conduct is actually kind of reiterated, because it does already kind of include everything needed.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I see there is paragraph E. Oh, geez. It is. Trying to go. It's on page 16 of the Code of Conduct, and it talks about engaging in misconduct while on a school bus. I understand your point about the Code of Conduct, and the Code of Conduct needs an overhaul. That's one of the big items on this committee's agenda, and I know it's really important to administration. Administration is working on that and is going to bring their recommendations to us in conjunction with what was gleaned from the NYU Metro work. So I'm sure Dr. Shields has taken down your comments and your thoughts. What's on the code of conduct is, I think, with respect to school bus behavior, is more concise than what is on this policy. But you raised a point, and it's something actually that that Mr. Smith had raised to me. And Dr. Shields, I'll ask you, who is the person who decides what happens with a student's, we'll say, right to be on the school bus? Who decides that? Who decides how many days the student is suspended from riding on the school bus? Is it the director of transportation? Is it the building principal? Is it the superintendent? And should there be a person designated on this, in this policy that decides that, or is it just we'll leave it fluid within the district? Because as Ms. Alvarez pointed out, a building principal might understand the student and the background of the student, and the director of transportation would have no concept and may be making decisions in a vacuum.
Yes, when it comes to discipline on school buses, those decisions are made at the building level. We would not want those decisions to be made at the district level because they don't know the child as well. So in the case of the middle school or high school, it's typically made at the assistant principalship level. At the elementary level, it's made at the principal level, or where we do have an assistant principal, that person could also engage in the process as well. But it's made at the building level, I think, is the answer to your question. I would not suggest we put any language like that into this policy because I think you want it to remain flexible.
Okay, Ms. Alvarez, we've taken your comments to heart. Dr. Shields has them, and I would like to see the code of conduct reviewed sooner rather than later. But it is a tome. It is quite an undertaking. So we ask for the public's patience, and the board is being patient as well. We are under obligation to review it every year, and I know that it's currently under review and moving forward as quickly as humanly possible. I see your hand is raised again, Ms. Alvarez. So let me, I think you can unmute yourself.
I did. I just was waiting. Sorry.
That's okay. It's fine.
It was just something separate. And I am trying to find the right words for it. But first, I applaud you, Ms. Brooks, for there was a moment when you guys were discussing the homework policy in the minutes. And I applaud you for bringing into the fact the community concerns based on the Agate meeting that you had attended and kind of commenting on that end of it as far as what the community has been expressing. Dr. Shields, I also applaud you because you referenced the minutes from another meeting as far as the general consensus. I will assume that the board had brought from the community. I think it's a little disheartening. I know I heard, like, obviously I'm one of two, which is unfortunate. I wish obviously more people came to some of the meetings, but Dr. Block, I have to be honest, like I had to listen, I think it was either for a full minute, whereas the community gets specified time in Board of Ed meetings, but I had to listen for a full minute, I believe, to say what you wanted. I want this, I want this, I want this for the homework policy. It's my understanding really that you were elected, my children joined the district only half year last year. So I'm only recently new to the district. As far as my kids go, I'm from Port Washington, so I've been here for a long time, but as far as my kids go, but I'm aware that you're an elected to be on this board and to represent community concerns and community wants. So I would hope that those wants are from community comments, and I would hope that those requests are from community needs. And, you know, I think I brought this up in another meeting another Board of Ed subcommittee, and that it's just sometimes wording is important, and I just had to spend a lot of time of hearing wants from one specific person. So I just wanted to make sure that I applauded Mrs. Brooks for kind of referencing other meetings from community.
Okay, thank you for the comment.
I hear you.
Dr. Block, I don't want to cut you off.
No, that was it. I hear you. I talk to community members all the time. And my comments in these meetings reflect them. Many of them do not attend these meetings because for a variety of reasons, many of them are working parents like myself and my wife and are not able to join during the day. And but I believe that my comments as a board member reflect large swaths of the community.
Okay, in my haste to get to the community members, I overlooked a board member who is here. Mr. Smith, sorry about that.
I actually raised it after the community member spoke, so you're all good. I just wanted to say, as I've been listening to the comments and particularly Ms. Alvarez, I would encourage you to, when you're looking at the bus policy, the bus discipline policy, Dr. Shields, a lot of the comments that you made about why the bus discipline for in-district students goes through their building is because the building principals are professional educators who understand specific circumstances and extraneous factors of students. But when we talk about discipline of private school students happening on buses, there seems to be a will to keep that inside the transportation office, which those people have expertise in transportation, but probably not expertise in education and how to handle discipline of students. So I think that there's a reason why the in-district students are being having their discipline managed through their building. So while I understand that we don't control the administrations of districts outside of ours and private schools, I think that you should look at how discipline, including bus suspensions, which again, we now know is a legal requirement, not a privilege. We should think about very carefully how we're thinking about that, because there may be, extraneous extenuating circumstances and mental health issues and special needs for students who are out of the district, yet their discipline is happening in the transportation office, which we don't think is appropriate for our own students. So I would highly encourage you to think about that in that way, just because, again, we know there was an incident that was brought to the board a few weeks ago, and the parent was unhappy with how the discipline was handled. I actually think the discipline was completely appropriate, but I did also see the problems in how it was handled, and the parent looked to this policy and found several holes in it in terms of how the discipline was meted out, because it says that the discipline will be decided by the principal. It doesn't say except in the case of out of district students where the discipline will be handled by the transportation office. We also don't have the regulations that it refers to, where it says that the administrator of transportation would have regulations. We didn't find those. So I think we're actually suspending out of district students without a clear policy, so the punishments can be considered to be, because we don't have the right backup and we're not consistent. I think that the policies can be considered to be, I don't know what the word is, but I can't think of the word, but I think you understand what I'm saying is. So I would ask that you guys look at that in that context and think about those out of district students the same way you would think about the in-district students. And that's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm hearing you say there's inconsistency. Maybe that's what you wanted to say, Mr. Smith, that because there aren't clear regulations, there may be.
Yeah, it maybe arbitrary, or it can seem arbitrary even if it isn't. No, I'm not saying that. Again, I actually think in the case that I'm talking about, which I'm only bringing up that case because we know about it, not because I think there's anything of note in that case. It's more that the parent felt that the punishment was, I think, capricious because it was given on a Friday afternoon to be effective the following Monday, and the parent had a lot of questions that were not really answered in the policy. So I think if the policy was more clear, and I know we're looking for flexibility, but in certain cases, the flexibility opens us also the benefit of having the flexible policy, which gives the administrators and the buildings discretion, also gives them room to be arbitrary, even if they don't mean to be. So you just have to balance that, I think.
Ms. Melkonian, your hand is raised.
That goes back to our earlier discussion about, I really think that we have issues with that third paragraph. I think it's not clear enough because we use that term, the administrator in charge of transportation. The language of that they're responsible for the procedures for informing and enforcing. I think for the benefit of the public, those kinds of things need to be very operationalized so that it's clear and people understand how they should proceed when there is an incident, if and when there is an incident on the bus. So I think that paragraph really needs some work.
I trust Dr. Shields will take it back, and it may be that we need to establish regulations, that we should go back to that and have solid regulations. And Dr. Shields, you'll report back to us what you come up with when you
Certainly
speak.
will.
Yes, thank you. Okay. With any other further questions, comments? Okay, great. So let's adjourn this meeting. Everybody have a very happy break, a healthy break, a restful break. We will see you back here on March 16th at 9:30 in the morning. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.